The kingdom of Eldoria had fallen silent. Once, its streets had buzzed with life, its towers had gleamed under the sun, and the laughter of children had echoed through its castle halls. But now, a heavy quiet weighed over the land, as though the air itself mourned the death of the queen. The king, once a man of vigor and command, had become a shadow of himself. His eyes, once bright and piercing, now reflected only sorrow. And his gait, once steady and strong, faltered with the weight of unseen grief. In a small village at the edge of Eldoria, Mara moved with purpose. A single mother of 5 children, she had grown used to hardships, but she carried them with quiet determination. Every day was a battle to feed her children, to keep them safe, and to find even a moment's peace in a world that seemed indifferent to the struggles of those who lived beyond the castle walls. Mara's life had been forged in fire, her heart tempered by love and necessity, yet she had not yet lost the spark of hope that burned stubbornly within her. The children ran ahead, laughing despite their hunger, their laughter like fragile lanterns against the gloom of the village. Mara followed, gathering herbs and supplies for the day's meals, thinking only of survival. When a sudden call shattered the morning calm. The royal soldiers were at the village gate. They demanded food, as they always did. But today, there was something different in their tone, something harsh, urgent, almost desperate. Mara met their gaze calmly, placing a hand on her children's shoulders. "I will give what I can," she said, her voice steady. "But do not take more than is fair." The soldiers hesitated, surprised by her boldness. Few villagers dared to speak so freely to the crown's men, and fewer still had the courage to meet the gaze of those who carried the king's orders with both pride and fear. Mara did not flinch, and when they finally nodded and accepted her offerings, she felt a small, private triumph. That evening, the wind carried a chill as Mara led her children home. Across the fields, the castle rose like a dark mountain, its towers shrouded in mist. It had been weeks since anyone had seen the king. Rumors filled the village. Some said he wandered the halls at night, speaking to shadows. Others whispered that he had given himself to sorrow entirely, leaving the kingdom in limbo. Mara paid little attention to gossip. She had her own burdens to bear. Yet fate has a way of bending paths toward one another, and hers was about to cross the king's in the most unexpected way. The castle gardens were empty, bathed in silver moonlight. Statues of forgotten queens and kings glimmered under the faint glow, their marble faces frozen in expressionless grace. It was here that Mara first saw him, the king struggling along the cobblestone path, his steps unsteady, his breath shallow. He moved with all the dignity of his station, but the effort was visible in every stiff joint, every faltering step. The years of grief had weighed him down, and an old injury that he had hidden from the world now betrayed him. Mara paused at the edge of the garden, unsure if she should approach. She had never seen a king up close before, and yet something in her heart told her this man was in pain that went far beyond what words could capture. "Your Majesty," she called softly, stepping forward. I can help you walk." The king turned, startled, and his lips curved into a bitter laugh. It was not cruel, but it was hollow, the sound of a man who had forgotten joy. "You, a mother of 5? You think you can help me?" His voice carried both disbelief and the faintest trace of amusement. Mara did not flinch. "I may not be strong like your soldiers," she said calmly, "but I can hold your arm. I can help you take one step at a time. That is all I offer." For a long moment, he studied her. The wind stirred the leaves, whispering through the branches, as if nature itself held its breath. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he allowed her to reach out, her hand brushing against his sleeve. The touch was electric in its simplicity. The king, who had been alone in his grief for so long, felt a warmth he had almost forgotten. Mara's steady presence, her fearless gaze, seemed to draw something out of him, something that had been buried beneath sorrow and pride. Together, they began to walk. One step, then another, Mara's hand supporting his, her presence a silent reassurance. He made no sound at first, only the occasional grunt of effort. But gradually, as the minutes stretched into a quiet rhythm, he allowed himself to lean a little more on her. "You do not understand what you ask of me," he said quietly, his voice tinged with both sorrow and awe. Mara's grip did not waver. "Everyone is broken," she said simply. "It is how we walk forward that matters." The king looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression softened. It was not forgiveness, nor was it trust, at least not yet, but it was a crack in the armor he had built around his heart. For the first time in months, perhaps years, he felt the stirrings of something like hope. As they walked, the shadows seemed to lengthen around them, curling and twisting among the statues and fountains. Mara noticed the way he flinched at certain movements, the way his eyes darted to corners as if expecting unseen threats. "You are afraid," she said quietly. "Of what?" He shook his head. "Of many things. Of losing myself. Of failing my kingdom. Of her death." His voice broke, and he turned his face away, hiding the tears that he could no longer contain. Mara's heart tightened. She had not expected this. She had not expected the king, a man so proud, to be so vulnerable, to be so human, and yet, in that vulnerability, she saw not weakness, but a deep, aching truth, a man who had loved and lost, and who now carried the weight of his sorrow like a sword at his back. "Then do not carry it alone," she said softly. "I will help you bear it. One step at a time. That is all I ask." He laughed again, this time a quieter, more fragile sound. "You are mad," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The way her hand held his, the way she moved with purpose and care, was something he had not felt in a long, long time. Suddenly, a shadow flitted across the garden. Mara stiffened, sensing a presence she could not see. The king tensed as well, his body coiling with instinctive caution. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible murmur. "Who's there?" the king demanded, his voice stronger now, though still tinged with fear. No answer came. Only the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a night bird. Mara did not move her hand from his arm. "Whatever it is," she said, "we face it together. You are not alone tonight." The king's chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths. He looked down at her, his eyes glistening with tears that refused to be held back. For so long, he had hidden his grief, pretending for the court, for the kingdom, for himself, that he could endure it alone. Now, in the soft silver light, he allowed himself to feel it fully. He stumbled, and Mara steadied him. The garden seemed to shrink around them, the statues and shadows pressing closer, as if the past itself had come to witness this fragile moment of connection. Then, without warning, he collapsed, knees hitting the cobblestones. Mara caught him just in time, her arms strong and steady despite her small frame. His head rested against her shoulder. And for the first time, he cried openly, without shame, without restraint. He began, then choked on the words. "I have been so lost." "You are not lost," Mara whispered, her own heart aching at the sight of his pain. "You are here, and that is enough for tonight." They remained there for long moments, the wind carrying their shared silence. Mara could feel his trembling, the tension of a man who had carried the weight of a kingdom and his own grief for far too long. And yet, even in that collapse, there was something hopeful, fragile but undeniable. A connection, a spark of trust, a hint that the shadows of the throne might yet be lifted. But from the darkness beyond the garden walls, A pair of eyes watched. A figure cloaked in black, hidden by the night, whispered words that no one else could hear. "She is not meant to save him." The voice hissed, cold and sharp. "Yet she may awaken the curse that sleeps in the blood of kings." Mara did not hear it. The king did not hear it. All that mattered in that moment was the warmth of human touch, the fragile thread of care that connected them in a world of shadows. As the moon dipped behind clouds, the garden seemed to hold its breath. The king, once untouchable, had broken, and the single mother, fierce and determined, had become the one person who could guide him back toward the light or into the shadows that waited just beyond the castle gates. And so, in the silent heart of Eldoria, their journey began one step at a time, under the watchful eyes of a kingdom that had almost forgotten how to hope. Cliffhanger. As Mara helped him to his feet, the distant howl of wolves echoed from the forest beyond the castle walls, a reminder that danger was never far, and that grief, even when shared, could attract both shadows and unseen threats. The castle of Eldoria seemed to breathe with shadows. The halls, once filled with music and laughter, now echoed with silence and the faint creak of old wood. Candles flickered in their sconces, throwing dancing shadows across the stone walls. Mara moved carefully through these corridors, 5 children trailing behind her, each one curious and cautious in equal measure. The king had not spoken much since that night in the garden. His eyes, though softer than before, still carried the weight of grief. He leaned on Mara more than he admitted, accepting her guidance silently, as if words themselves might betray his pride. Yet Mara sensed the cracks growing in the armor he had built over years of sorrow. Every glance he gave her, every hesitation before he spoke, was a step closer to trust, a step she was determined to nurture carefully. The morning brought a pale light through tall windows. Mara helped the king to rise from his bedchamber, his movements stiff but more confident than the night before. She noticed the way he winced at the slightest pressure on his leg and the tension in his shoulders as he attempted to move without assistance. "You need to allow yourself to rest, not just walk," she said gently, offering her arm. "I am not accustomed to being cared for," he murmured, his voice a mixture of shame and disbelief. "I am a king. My duty is to bear burdens, not be helped." Mara shook her head. "Even kings are human. Strength is not in bearing burdens alone, but in knowing when to let others help you." He did not reply immediately, but he took her arm and followed her down the corridor. The children peeked from behind corners, whispering among themselves about the strange woman who dared to walk alongside the king. For the first time in months, Mara noticed the flicker of curiosity and perhaps admiration in the eyes of the royal guards who silently observed them. The castle gardens had become their quiet refuge. The stone paths and ancient fountains held memories of joy long past. But Mara walked with the king each morning, helping him regain not only his strength, but a small measure of hope. Step by step, word by word, she became a tether to the world he had almost abandoned. Yet even as trust grew, the shadows of the past loomed closer. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting a blood-red glow over the castle, a figure appeared at the edge of the gardens. Cloaked in deep black and carrying an aura of authority, she watched the king and Mara with calculating eyes. "Who is she?" Mara asked quietly, sensing the presence before she could see the details. "I do not know," the king admitted, his voice low, tight with unease. "But she is not ordinary. There is power in her, a darkness I have felt before, long ago." The figure did not move closer. She only watched, silent as a shadow, her eyes reflecting the fading light. Mara sensed danger, but also a challenge, a test, perhaps, that the king could not yet face alone. She tightened her hand on his arm. "Whatever she wants," she said. "We face it together." Days passed, and with each, the king's body grew stronger, though his heart remained a battleground. He told Mara fragments of his life before the queen's death, of joy, of laughter, of love, and she listened without judgment, offering only compassion. The children, too, grew attached to him, fascinated by the gentle side of a man whom they had feared from stories and distant glimpses. Mara, in turn, shared pieces of her life. She spoke of her children, of her struggles in the village, and of the little triumphs that kept her moving forward. Slowly, walls that had long divided them began to crumble. The king laughed quietly at her stories, sometimes with amusement, sometimes with bittersweet recognition of the simple joys he had lost. One night, as the castle slept under a blanket of mist and moonlight, the king awoke in a cold sweat. He had been dreaming of the queen, her face pale, her eyes filled with accusation. He had dreamed of failure, of a kingdom lost, and of the curse that, according to ancient whispers, haunted the royal bloodline. Mara, sleeping nearby, heard his breathing change and rose quietly to his side. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "It was only a dream," she said softly. He shook his head, shivering. "It feels like more than a dream. It is a warning, a memory. I cannot tell the difference anymore." Mara guided him gently to sit on the edge of his bed. "You are not alone. I am here. Your children are here. The kingdom is here. None of this must be faced alone." He looked at her then. Really looked. And the weight of grief in his eyes threatened to overwhelm him. "I have failed them. I have failed her. I have failed myself." "You have not failed," Mara whispered. "You are still here. That is proof enough that you can rise again." It was the first time he allowed himself to cry openly before another human since the queen's death. He clung to Mara, and for a long time, they sat together in silence, broken by nothing but the sound of distant wind through the castle towers. The days that followed brought new challenges. The mysterious figure in black began to make her presence known. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones of a sorceress who had once served the queen, loyal to her, even in death. Mara felt a chill each time her name was whispered. She understood that the king was caught between past loyalty and present need, and she feared that this figure might test the fragile trust they were building. One afternoon, while helping the king regain balance in the castle gardens, Mara felt a sudden coldness in the air. The leaves stilled, and shadows lengthened unnaturally. The sorceress appeared, stepping from the darkness as if the mist itself had carried her there. "You walk with him," she said, her voice both melodic and sharp. "Do you know what you risk?" Mara stood her ground. "I risk nothing but caring for someone who has been left alone for too long." The king stepped forward, a flicker of old authority in his eyes. "And you are?" he demanded. The sorceress bowed slightly, but her gaze remained fixed on Mara. "I am one who protects this kingdom," she said, "but protection comes at a cost. The king carries a curse, one that will claim the land if he succumbs to despair. Your care may awaken hope, or awaken the shadow that waits for him to falter." Mara's grip on the king's arm tightened. "We will face whatever comes together. You may watch, but we do not fear it." The sorceress studied them for a long moment. "Courage alone may not be enough," she said, and then she was gone, swallowed by the mist, as if she had never been there. The king exhaled shakily, and Mara guided him back to the castle. "Do not dwell on her," she said softly. "The past may have its power, but it does not define the future." He nodded, but his mind was a tangle of fear and grief. "I have lived my life trying to honor her memory," he murmured. "But perhaps I have only been honoring my own pain." Mara smiled faintly, a small warmth against the chill of the castle walls. "Then let us honor life instead. One step at a time, together." Their bond deepened in these quiet moments. Mara became the thread that connected the king to the living world, and he became a figure of strength the children admired. They laughed in the halls, played games in the gardens, and for fleeting moments, the shadow over Eldoria seemed to lift. But shadows have a way of returning. One night, the king awoke screaming, haunted by a vision of the queen's death. In his dream, he saw conspirators, cloaked in black, surrounding the queen. They whispered of power, of betrayal, of a kingdom torn by ambition. The king awoke, clutching Mara's hand, his body trembling with a fear he could not voice. "They wanted me broken," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "But I was not ready to die alone." Mara held him, her heart pounding. "You are not alone," she said firmly. "I will not let you face it alone. Ever." As they clung to one another in the quiet night, the wind howled outside the castle walls. A storm approached, carrying with it the scent of distant forests and the promise of danger. Wolves howled, not far from the gates, and the sound of hooves could be heard in the distance. An army was coming, though their intent remained unknown. The king, though still fearful, felt a strange stirring of courage. For the first time in many months, he realized that grief, though heavy, could be shared, and that the presence of someone steadfast, someone who would walk beside him no matter the shadows, could rekindle strength he thought he had lost forever. Mara, sensing the rising tension, gathered the children close. "We must prepare," she said. "The night is dark, but together we are stronger than any shadow." The king nodded, a quiet determination settling in his chest. He felt the truth of her words, the promise of loyalty, and a growing hope that even the deepest wounds could be healed, not by magic alone, but by courage, love, and the simple act of standing together. Yet outside, in the shadows, eyes watched and whispered. The sorceress had returned, unseen. Her voice carried on the wind. The curse stirs. The king's heart is no longer dead, but the path to redemption will demand more than courage. He must face the truth before it consumes everything. The castle held its breath, and the storm drew closer, signaling that the kingdom of Eldoria was about to be tested not only by grief and curses, but by forces that threatened to unravel everything the king and Mara had fought to protect. And so, in the quiet of the night, with the wind singing through the towers and the children asleep, Mara and the king stood together, preparing for a dawn that might bring salvation or destruction. Cliffhanger. As lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the hills, the first banners of the approaching army became visible on the horizon. The king gripped Mara's hand tightly, and for the first time, he whispered, "If we fall together." Shadows stirred behind them, and the curse of Eldoria waited patiently for the next move. The dawn rose over Eldoria, pale and uncertain, as if the sky itself feared what the day might bring. Storm clouds still lingered on the horizon, and the first banners of the approaching army fluttered against the wind like dark omens. Inside the castle, the king stood at the top of the grand staircase, his eyes fixed on the distant hills where the enemy gathered. Beside him, Mara held the hands of their children, her heart steady, though her mind raced with strategy and concern. "Do you fear them?" she asked quietly, her gaze never leaving the horizon. The king shook his head, though a flicker of tension tightened his jaw. "I fear what we might become if we falter," he admitted. "I have spent so long in sorrow that I forgot how to act, but today, I will act." Mara squeezed his hand. "Then act with courage, but not alone. We are stronger, together." The castle guards, once doubtful of Mara's presence, now watched her with a mixture of respect and amazement. She had moved among the castle halls, quietly but firmly asserting her presence. She guided the children, organized provisions, and even offered suggestions for fortifying the walls, all while keeping the king's needs in view. Her courage and clarity inspired even the weary soldiers. And soon, whispers of admiration for her reached the ears of the king. He turned to her then, his expression unguarded. "You are extraordinary," he said, voice low but sincere. "I underestimated what strength truly means." Mara smiled softly, but there was no pride in her expression. "Strength is in caring," she said, "in standing when the world wants you to kneel, and in walking with someone who is too afraid to move alone." For the first time, the king understood that her words were not merely encouragement. They were a call to reclaim his life, to face the shadows that had haunted him for years. The morning passed in a tense rhythm. The children helped carry supplies to the battlements, laughing when they could, their innocence shining like tiny lanterns against the dark tension. Mara moved between the soldiers, offering calm instructions and reassuring words. She had become not only a guide for the king but a beacon for all who were anxious about the coming confrontation. Then, the sorceress appeared once more, stepping from the mist near the castle gates. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, studied the king. "You have grown stronger," she said, voice echoing with a strange authority. "But strength alone will not lift the curse. You must face it. The truth of your heart." The king met her gaze. "I am ready," he said, the first confident tone he had spoken in months. "I will not let fear rule me. I will protect my kingdom, my people, and those I love." The sorceress inclined her head, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Then perhaps the curse may be lifted, if the heart is true." The first attack came at midday. The enemy, bold and confident, charged toward the castle walls. The king, once paralyzed by fear and grief, now commanded with clarity. He stood beside Mara, their hands intertwined, their presence together giving strength to all who followed. "Hold the walls," he shouted, his voice carrying across the battlements. "And our home." Mara guided the children to a safe tower, but they insisted on watching. Their small faces pressed against the window panes. She allowed them to see, knowing that courage is learned as much as it is inherited. The battle raged, banners waving and swords clashing. The king, though no longer fully healed, moved with careful precision. He fought not only with skill but with the wisdom that grief had given him, the understanding of loss, the value of life, and the need to protect what truly matters. Mara assisted from behind the walls, coordinating archers and rallying soldiers, her voice clear above the chaos. Through it all, the king and Mara never let go of each other's hands. In their unity, there was a quiet power, a reminder that human connection could stand stronger than any weapon or curse. As the sun reached its zenith, the enemy faltered. The king's strategy, guided by courage and sharpened by grief, held firm. Yet the sorceress's warning echoed in his mind. The curse would not be lifted by victory alone. He had to face the deepest truth of his heart, the truth he had avoided since the queen's death. He turned to Mara in the midst of the battle, sweat and blood smearing his face. I have lived in shadow for too long," he confessed, his voice raw with emotion. "I have carried grief as if it were my only purpose. But I see now, I can choose life again. I can choose to love, even when it frightens me." End quote. Mara's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of joy. "Then do it," she said simply. "Choose. Choose the light, the life, and us." He nodded, taking a deep breath. In that moment, the weight of the curse seemed to lift slightly, as if acknowledging his courage and truth. With renewed strength, he led the final push, rallying the soldiers and driving the enemy from the walls. The banners of the approaching army fell, and the castle gates stood unbroken. When the battle ended, the castle and village were battered but intact. The children ran into the arms of their mother, laughing and crying. and the soldiers cheered for the king and the woman who had walked beside him. The king stood with Mara in the gardens, now quiet and still, the remnants of battle settling around them. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw not only a mother of 5, not only a courageous woman, but someone who had healed his heart in ways he had thought impossible. "I laughed when you offered to help me walk," he said, voice thick with emotion. "But now I see. You carried me farther than I ever could have walked alone." Mara smiled, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "We walked together," she said, "and we will continue to walk, no matter what comes next." The sorceress appeared once more, stepping lightly from the shadows. She studied the scene for a long moment, then nodded. "The curse is lifted," she said. "Not by magic alone, but by the courage to love, to trust, and to live again. Eldoria is safe. For now." With that, she vanished into the mist, leaving the king, Mara, and their children to the quiet of the evening. The storm had passed, and the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the castle and gardens. It was a light of hope, of renewal, and of a life reclaimed from shadow. The king took Mara's hand and led her to the edge of the garden, where the statues of past queens and kings watched silently. He knelt before her, not in submission, but in reverent acknowledgement of the courage and love she had shown him. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not as a mother to children, not as a guide to a king, but as the heart I have chosen. Stay, and let us face the future together." Mara's eyes glistened with tears, her heart full. "I will stay," she said firmly. "We will face it together. Always." The children ran to them, laughter and joy ringing out across the gardens. For the first time in many years, the castle echoed with life and love, not sorrow. The king rose, holding Mara's hand tightly. "The shadows may return," he said. Mara nodded, her gaze steady on his. "Then, we begin a new chapter. One step at a time. Together." And so, under the golden glow of the setting sun, the king and the single mother of 5 stood side by side, their hands intertwined, their hearts healed, and their spirits united. They faced a world that had once seemed impossible to conquer. The curse that had haunted the royal line for generations had been lifted not by power, not by sword, not by fear, but by courage, love, and the simple act of walking together. Yet even as peace settled over Eldoria, the wind whispered through the castle towers. Shadows lingered at the edges of forests, and the night carried the memory of battles past. But the king, once broken by grief, and Mara, fierce and steadfast, had discovered a truth more powerful than any curse: that the heart, when it chooses love, becomes a force that no darkness can destroy. Cliffhanger. Closing hint. As the stars emerged one by one in the night sky, the king turned to Mara, eyes glistening with tears. "I laughed when you offered to help me walk, but now I will follow you anywhere," he said. And from the distant hills, a faint shadow watched, not with malice, but as a silent reminder that destiny, like love, is never truly finished, always waiting for the next step.